Hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Commerce DevCast. We are going to talk today about the front end in e-commerce, and we have a special guest, Sergey Chernenko, the front end lead at Hyvä company. Thanks that you have joined. And as usual, our hosts, me, Vladislav Podorozhny, solution specialist, software architect and partner at Runsroot GmbH, Vitaly Boyko, senior Magento and Adobe Commerce developer at the Carry company, and of course, Alexander, Magento department manager in WeConnect DK. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
So let's talk about the front end. We are backend developers. So me, Alexander, Vitaly, we are mostly the backend developers. We are touching sometimes the front end, but we are not an experts in the front end. And usually we ask guys like you, Sergey, to help us out with the various front-end tasks, especially if we need to build something big, huge, or decide which front-end to use for which platform based on the customer needs. Tell us in a few words about your work and what is front-end in general for you.
I believe you see a lot of memes about how backend and frontend looks like. And if you see something on the backend side, it's pretty not beautiful, polite word for this explanation, but everything that all the customers see on the site, it's mostly front-end work. And that's area what I'm working on usually.
So this is one of the most important areas actually, because there's the face of your application, the face of your tool, and something that end user is communicating and working with.
Exactly. Any visual user interface elements and any interactive things that customers have on the site, like some buttons, modal windows, chats, visual hero banners with video images, interaction with widgets, add to cart button, adding to cart, going to checkout. The data that is loaded, usually we request from frontend to backend, and this is a gray zone, gray area between providing the data, but preparation of all the visual elements is related to the frontend work that I usually do.
I want to emphasize that based on my experience on my projects, the front end is super important for the conversion because I'm working mostly with the e-commerce, and the conversion is super dependent on a good and well-optimized front end. I'm not even talking about the well-prepared UI and UX concepts that should be put in a very basic, in a fundament, right, in the basics of the front-end development that needs to be made for this specific application. What do you think? What are the key and most important points that needs to be considered for the front-end part of the e-commerce application? Sergey.
That's a good question, because front-end is not only about, hey, you have to fill this button from red color to another green color, and it's not only like front-end work, but also you have to integrate third-party services related to cookies, analytics, etc. But at the same time, when these scripts loaded, it also could affect your performance of the page initial loading, and you have to follow all the steps. Another area is accessibility. It's the most important topic, especially for now, 2025, because in Europe, we have a new general law that push all the clients to follow the standards of accessibility for most users, and this is really important. And you have to follow all the rules about button size, outlines, focusing on elements, etc., etc. And it's really tricky to implement, honestly. Another stuff, you have to implement Google Analytics, for example, or I don't know, any alternatives like Pivot Pro, but it doesn't matter. In this case, under the hood, you have to send some events that allows to a client understand their revenue, a customer's behavior, etc. Also related topic is marketing subscription, etc. You have to prepare some subscriptions form, model windows for that, etc. So you have to keep in mind all the things that's related to performance, behavior, and how to improve user experience during the using the site.
Okay, Sergey. So I actually finished production deployment right before this podcast with the accessibility fixes. So you just
Congrats.
hit into the point, we got a couple bugs after that because there was a need to rebuild the full front end, It's like going on almost every template where the user is getting interacting and changing it. And we've got the small minor things here and there. We're resolving it right now, but that's totally true. That's really, really complex task that should be done. And you need to consider everything, literally everything. Yeah. Guys, Vitaly and Alexander, what is your experience with the front-end topics? I mean, let's focus on what do you think is the most important for the front end on your projects, based on your experience? Of course, from the back-end point of view. Vitaly, may you start?
Yeah, sure. Well, throughout my career, I mostly worked with B2B clients, and I would say the front end, like for B2B client, has different demands than like for B2C clients, and I mean in e-commerce. It's pretty different, for example, because it has like different priorities. Let's see it in example of choosing between server-side rendering and client-side rendering. In my opinion, it's not that important for B2B client to have like client-side rendering because it's needed for lowering the load on server. But the goal that B2B usually has is to lower the load on manager, not on server. This is why we actually are choosing customizable systems like Magento that have that layout structure that easily adjustable. Yeah, so demands are different, and yeah, I don't know what to say more about it.
I think I understand what you're talking about. So B2B, they're not into let's make it super performance optimized. Let's not think about the Google score, but let's think about how many features could we put in there in order to make the manager life easier. It should just work. If you need to wait a couple seconds, let it wait a couple seconds. Of course, if it's super important to make it fast, then you're investing in this specific feature to make it fast. But other than that, it doesn't really matter how to try, right?
Because prior to that, we had what? We had paper or maybe some spreadsheet and telephone. And it wouldn't be logical to move from paper and telephone right to, like, I don't know, cutting edge technologies like PWA or something like this.
Definitely. Okay, great. Thanks. Alexander, what are the main things from your side about the front end to share?
During my career, I had experience with many different approaches, how even different agencies are selling their clients the front end. And I also part of this, so we used to build what was sold sometimes. But the spectrum of different technologies and approaches is just tremendous, and the variety of technologies that you can choose in any kind of specific case that can solve some problems and introduce others is also huge. I mean, if you're thinking about historically, that's very back in the days, the front end was just a part of the scripts or part of the application that's were written, and it was integrated directly into the code. And continued it was started to separate and become another set of technologies that's also created the different roles. That's where people occupied with. Where we have a separation on the backend and front-end developers. Years in e-commerce, I worked with Headless front-ends, with Monolith front-ends, with PWAs, as well as a single-page application and a multi-page application. The problem here that many businesses not fully understand what they are gaining from the different technologies, and it happens sometimes that business can invest into the wrong things. It also sometimes happen that the same, like different technologies solving the same problem, and it's very easy to get lost into it. I also said that some businesses, they made a wrong decisions at the end, deciding like with what technology to continue to build their commerce. And in my work, it's very important to understand what actually are business goals, who are the customer segment of the business and whom we are trying to sell goods and products. Because some businesses, they are more focused on mobile, and it's general trend that the mobile users are these days the majority in the different business areas who is buying things, and you cannot just ignore them. So you need to deliver the good experience as well for mobile users and for desktop users. Also for others, it's important to have front end that can be integrated with some third-party services. And in this case, you need to consider something that can be as well fast and scalable, and also good in integrations with some other applications. It's very depends on the business, on the merchant, and it's kind of almost every project are unique in their way, how we are consulting them and what we are recommending them to implement to build the best e-commerce experience possible.
Okay. Thanks, Alexander. Totally agree with you. So it's different requirements and different approaches should be applied for the different projects. From my experience, around 90% of projects that are worked on actually should just have the front end that will going to fulfill the following requirements. It's good in mobile and desktop. Usually if it's good in mobile, that's most likely good in desktop. Secondly, it should be well supported. So I don't want to end up with a technology that is not getting updates and I'm getting the security issues in 2 years after I implemented the shop, or even less, Secondly, there should be a good ecosystem. For example, there are various solutions for the front end. They're great from the architecture point of view and performance point of view, but they don't have a good ecosystem. They don't have extensions or other solutions where I could install and plug and play, integrate them, as you mentioned. So for me, it's a minus, for example, because I want to be able to deliver for the customers of ours the best solutions for the reasonable money. Of course, there are cases in those 10% of other projects when there is no other choice than just pick up the front end that you all build from scratch, or use already prepared and built front end, but that doesn't have a good ecosystem in terms of this plug and play solutions. Of course, that could be the case, but we're trying to avoid that. And so those are the main topics from my side that I see. I'm not a front end, I'm a back end. Those are my visions. Yeah. So let's ask another interesting question to our front end expert. What are the types of the front ends for the e-commerce? I believe they could be generic, not only for the e-commerce, but what are you mostly using for the e-commerce? What front-end types, what front-end technologies? Could you tell us, Sergey?
Yeah, sure. You're absolutely right. There are general 2 types of architecture for front-end. The first one, as we discussed, for example, related to Magento, Adobe Commerce, it's a good example of monolith architecture, where you have the full repository of all the models, all the themes, of the code base with all the integrations in one place. You can push only to one repository and have all the code and work only on that. It has some cons, some pros, but anyway, it's existing and it was historically created as a general pattern of development years ago. But now, again, in 2025, we have more e-commerce sites and even some other projects, mostly integrated with headless stuff. Headless means that you can separate all the integrations and applications as a different apps. And for example, backend could be stored on one server. Then you can prepare a new front-end application and deploy it separately, even on another hosting, on another server, etc. And also you could have some middlewares, layers, mesh API, etc. to allow you easily connect backend and frontend and unify the requests. And for example, backend could have data in one format, frontend expects data in another format, but in API you can align both ends and to prepare the data in unified way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so two types, Monolith and the Headless. In general, of course, there are some hybrids, right? And what are the main well-known products for the Monolith and for the Headless? Do you know, sir?
As I already said, a good example of monolith stuff is Adobe Commerce, Magento. As I said, you have everything in one place, and it's
mean
really
the
handy.
default front end of the Adobe Commerce, right? Not all of those family of and zoo of other front ends. The default front end, the Luma theme, right?
Yeah, sure. I'm talking about Luma exactly, because it's a built-in theme that you can use when you install Magento. Another example that I have is Shopify Liquid themes. For example, when you create account in Shopify and you go to the admin panel, you already see Visual Editor, and you can go to Storefront and you already see some changes. And it could be easily updated in the visual editor to see the changes on the storefront. And it means it's monolith because the backend side is connected with the storefront in one place, and the theme is only like the one application to work with this. But of course, Shopify is mostly about frontend because all the backend stuff is handled on their servers, and it's a bit closed source. It means that you don't have access to modify the backend as you wish. You have only like some APIs, and you can prepare new endpoints with custom data. You can create additional things to customize your storefront, but you don't have access to all the code. And it's also a limitation in comparison with Adobe Commerce. You don't have such things. If you own the code base, you own completely everything. If we go back to Magento, Adobe Commerce ecosystem, they own it like monolith architecture to learn. And in comparison with all the competitors, they had to follow all the new nowadays standards, etc., and had to implement some headless stuff as well. And currently we have Hyvä themes. We had recently a Magento PVA Studio Vienna theme, and also the latest thing currently we have is Adobe Commerce Storefront with AM, App Builder, API Mesh, etc. So Adobe completely tries to go outside the monolith architecture and implement new stuff, but it doesn't have backward compatibility with Monolith, but it's highly connected to the previous stuff. So you don't need to rewrite everything through away the old structure and prepare a completely new storefront. No, you can keep everything that you already have and build over that some new stuff, only like new functionality, not to rewrite the old one. And it's a nice thing in this case.
So it becomes kind of a hybrid, but at the end, you're keeping in mind that you need to fully migrate to the IAM, right? To do not have two systems, two front ends to support, right?
As Vitaly told, it always depends on the business and requirements. So probably you need, probably don't. And it's always depend on the business, on the behavior of your customers, what they expect, what you sell, what application you want to achieve in the end. So I don't have a clear answer for you because it always depends.
Yeah, sometimes it's just easier to have two front ends and keep them supported. Yeah, that sounds strange, but sometimes it's the case. Okay, so I know Hyvä, right? So Hyvä is a new bright front end for the Magento and for the Adobe Commerce, and they are utilizing the monolith architecture, but with more modern technologies than the Luma, the Alpine.js, the Tailwind, and other many things. And they're actively developing and evolving this front end. Have you tried it out?
I didn't work with Hyvä closely, but I understand all the principles that they had and have currently. But all the tools tries to solve some issues that they had at the moment. And Hyvä was created at the moment when a performance of Magento, especially with built-in monolith storefront based on Luma theme, was completely slow. It was completely tricky to customize, and you have to always have a team that the teams that have good expertise with Magento customizations. And in comparison with other stuff, currently you have a full market of like React developers, Vue.js developers, etc. And it's easy to hire some new people who even never worked with Magento and delegate to them the part of storefront, just provide clear documentation regarding API endpoints, how to get the data, etc. But in comparison with built-in Magento storefront, you have to teach people how to work with this. And Hyvä solved that issue that you can significantly improve the performance of your storefront. And it was a game changer in comparison with Luma customization, because you had to know how to work with UI components based on Knockout.js, etc. It's completely tricky. Even for front-end developers. I know that you guys on the backend, you work always with UI components like listing, form, and you have more experience with them, even in comparison with front-end developers. But at the same time, to prepare some interactive elements and pages and interesting solutions for storefronts, you have to go deeply to UI components and provide some interactive elements on the storefront. But it's tricky to do because it's pretty old technology and it's too slow to make it interesting and really quick. And in comparison with Hyvä that solves it already, you can work with Tailwind. That's also a game changer for all the front-end developers across all the technologies, because writing styles is pretty fast in comparison. Also, you can use Alpine.js. That's also more faster than Knockout.js, but at the same time you have to know that because new technologies doesn't use Alpine, mostly not, and it's also the issue. And you still have some limitation. You have to combine PHP code with Alpine.js, and it's not nice. Also, you have to solve some issues like if you want to prepare custom elements in page builder with specific Tailwind classes, you have to manage it on the storefront application to fetch all the styles, not to have a broken storefront as a result. So all the tools that created solve some issues at the moment, but there is no silver bullet. No.
Okay. So the last question to you, and then I come back to guys. What are the top 3 front-end technologies, front-end products you're going to use for your generic Magento 2 project? So this is not the multi-billion business merchant. This is some multi-million business version, and with not super huge traffic. So something in the middle. What would you use?
So I mostly worked with Monolith architecture of Magento, but last time I had some new project with integration of ViewStorefront. Currently it's called Alokai, and it was based only on Vue ecosystem, but currently it also aligned with multi-technical stacks, and you can use React, for example, and you can use Vue, even study something new. But of course, if the most team worked with React, there is no sense to go with Vue, for example. So it's not always about what technology is better now. All the technologies are good. They solve some issues, but you have to be aligned with your budget, deadlines, expertise, and etc. I just wanted to go back to your question, and the answer is currently is most used is Alokai storefront, and it's pretty connected to Magento and had a lot of stuffs. And also currently we are working with App Builder and Adobe Commerce storefront, but I don't have enough experience with that, and also it has still have some limitation. So we have to wait a bit to understand what we can achieve with these technologies as well.
Does Alokai has plug-and-play solutions like an extensions for the Hyvä or the Luma themes?
It's a good question because mostly I worked only with ViewStorefront stuff, and ViewStorefront 1 was based only on like Next 1 solution, and ViewStorefront 2 was based on Next 2. And I was deeply digged in the ecosystem of Vue, and I really love it in comparison with React and Next.js, but it's my own like preference. But it doesn't matter that I can work with React and Next.js, of course. But in Vue, you have always chain of nesting some stuff. And for example, initially you have Vue, Then over that, you have Next. Over that, you have Alokai ViewStorefront, and then it's connected to Magento. So in this deep chain, you have to always remember and understand what you have to install, what to implement, and where to get the data, what you want to achieve.
I lost myself in those layers already.
It usually happens with all the front-end developers.
This happens when backend developer looks on the front end.
Okay, so actually there is no plug and play extensions, right? So like we have unmodulated navigation, for example, right? There is no unmodulated navigation for the Alokai with the ViewStorefront and other stuffs. You need to develop it yourself or just find the pile of code and integrate it into your system. Am I right?
That's not correct in this way that you describe it, but partially you're right. But back to this chain, long chain.
No.
You still have some models based on Next. And for example, if you want to integrate Google Tag Manager like GTM, some Google Analytics, maybe some cookie consent banners, etc., some models already prepared. If you want to have like multi-store views with translations and etc., you also have a model prepared for Next. If you want to make some smaller things, for example, some beautiful UI elements and maybe some useful hooks, composables to implement some easy stuff like to display model, window, etc., you already have some models around Vue ecosystem. And for example, the most popular is Vue.use. At the same time, all the third-party services that connected to your e-commerce store, they always have some SDK to allow you easily to integrate their stuff. And for example, if you use Alokai with ViewStorefront, they already provided some API and SDK to allow you to implement authentication to connect it to Adobe Commerce. They also provide some API endpoints to fetch, maybe a customer cart and all the items added to cart to the session, etc. Also, they provided connection to fetch all the categories, to prepare a menu, to prepare all the PLP grid, this stuff. Also, you have a possibility to add to wish list, add to compare, etc. It's already provided out of the box, but it's based only on ViewStorefront. So Next doesn't have this out of the box. And yeah, in this chain, you have to always remember where to get this data and where to find it.
So if I get it correctly, you need to develop everything.
Yeah, that's true.
pretty much it. Okay, I got it. So there is always pros and cons. From my side, I see, so getting back to my original question, what are the top 3 front ends that I would use for my projects? I would say the top one would be the Hyvä. And because most of the clients of ours are in a business segment that will gonna fit Hyvä pretty good. For the PVA, for the headless applications and Alokai, for example, that you described, you would need to have pretty budget, I would say, in order to build everything. Because as we just figured out, you need to develop many things in order to get some basic functionality that already can be achieved in Hyvä by purchasing and installing some of the extensions and hooking it here and there. You need to develop things for the headless. Pretty big things. Unless you already have a huge expertise in this area and you have models or the parts of the libraries in your pocket where you just take it, install it, and that's it. But they're not so widely shared open source as any extensions for the Magento, for the Hyvä. The second, my choice would be probably the ViewStorefront, but yeah, this is the headless thing. Why? Because I see very big potential in painless upgrades when you are communicating with your front end by the API. Though it's pricey, as I mentioned before. And the third one, the last one, that would be the Adobe Experience Manager with our builder and all of the stuff around. It's on the third place for now, only because I didn't have enough experience with that. I only heard about it, I read the documentation, I have not played around with it, but that looks promising as well. Though I'm not a fan of vendor locking here, because if you were gonna go with the Adobe Experience Manager and with the App Builder, you'll be pretty much locked to the Adobe and they could treat you as they want. And the prices could go up and down and not pretty much my thing. I'm more open source guy. I want to see what I'm doing. What are your opinion, guys? Alexander, Vitaly, so what are the top 3 front ends that you would recommend to your customers based on your experience? Of course, everyone keep in mind that 3 of us are backend developers. Vitaly, Alexander, who want to answer my question? I see some strange face from Vitaly. Vitaly, you.
Yeah,
Please.
sure. So let's put it simple. If you are talking about small business, I would go with no-code, low-code solutions like, for example, WordPress or Shopify. When it goes about middle business, when you already have multiple stores, maybe multiple facilities, I would go with just Luma and Magento open source. And when it goes for I would go with Magento Commerce. And when it goes about some huge enterprises, when it goes in like complicated because there are a lot of solutions, so it's really gonna depend on business goals and that requires huge investigations. But I believe when we are talking about this side of things, it's when those cutting-edge technologies are actually needed because we have millions of clients, right? A lot of inventory and stuff. So this is when we need those PWAs and other cool stuff.
Alexander?
Yeah, before I give you my list, I will start from 2 anecdotes. One was related that's 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, when I started to work I started to work in software development. After studying jQuery, that was supposed to take probably first or second months of my experience with web, I started to study Knockout.js. And at those days, it was already a technology that's slowly dying. So what was my surprise, and in a few years, I saw that this is the core technology for Magento 2 and their components. And this was one. And the second one, that's when I came to WeConnect, which was 4 years ago. We had a team of front-end developers that were mostly experienced with HTML and CSS. And we decided that we want to change it, and we started to invest heavily in their education. And they had similar experience as I had when they learned jQuery. That was pretty easy. Going into this reactive approach with Knockout.js was so difficult. I mean, you need to just twist your brain on 180 degrees and to start understanding how to work with these things. But fortunately, this happens at some point, and then everything else become easier. And somewhere in that period, we started to look into Hyvä themes. And then we, of course, asked some of our front-end developers to investigate and get into the things. And after the guys spent like a few days doing the same practical tasks that they had for Knockout.js, he came to me and said, please tell me that we are going to work with Hyvä in future. I love Alpine.js so much. It's so much better and so much easier to understand and work with than Knockout.js. So yeah, that's kind of the real story. And it's really fun because, as Sergey mentioned, that's the technology stack, the learning curve, when you started to work with Magento and when you started, Luma theme, the default Magento, and when you started to working with Hyvä theme, they are slightly different. Even you're still using the same template, the same layouts, just that Magento use the customly written Knockout.js and their jQuery widgets that is also kind of customized in comparison with what is come with Laravel ecosystem by default, the Tailwind CSS and Alpine.js. It made a huge difference because it's much easier just to take some guy from Laravel ecosystem and help him to understand the layouts and templates than to take the person who is just familiar with the front end and I don't know some React or other JavaScript technologies and start him to give them understand the Luma theme front end. So getting back to your question, I think that the number one is Hyvä. We're using it almost on every our project. It's also, we're using it so wide that I even see nowadays limitations for it, where you probably don't want to go with the Hyvä theme. And this mostly related to something very custom when you need to build some very hard and huge front-end logic, like a single page application, like in a checkout, like why we are not using the Hyvä theme as default on the checkout, why we have the separated application for Hyvä checkout. That's because the architecture done in the way that you can start using it, and it's not require you much time to extend it. But usually with this simplicity come limitation, like how much of the things you can build around, because the bigger become your application, the harder it become to manage it. And in these cases, where if you are building something really big, then Luma could be a better choice when you need just to operate with hundreds of JavaScript files and etc. But we never tried. Maybe it can be done the same with MageWire and the same as Hyvä did with Hyvä Checkout. On the second place, Adobe Commerce storefront with the Edge delivery, just because it's, the work that they did for the last years, it's really great having the API mesh, having that app builder where you can up your applications and do whatever you need, even without changing the Magento code. That's really great to have this possibility. But there's still kind of, that's in the way to become even better, because you cannot build much with the current apps in App Builder, that they don't support any any complex databases that can store complex data. But it's still nice approach if you are talking about front ends, what you can use with Adobe Commerce. And the third way, that's basically that I had experience with ViewStorefront, and I placed in the third place just because there's really limited options for integrations. We suffered a lot especially with checkout, with payment methods, that they support ADN, but if you need to integrate something else, then they just become a nightmare, because in most cases you either need to switch and fall back to the default checkout, or you need to write it on your own. Well, this kind of different technologies, I won't recommend like decoupled or headless solution for merchants that actually don't need them. That if they don't have any specific reason except the hype to use, for example, the ViewStorefront, then they probably shouldn't use it. But yeah, that's my list.
Okay, great. Thanks for the explanation. I'm pretty support you on everything that you mentioned. So everyone wants simple answers, especially if you are merchant and you want to decide on which solution to use for your website or for your e-commerce store. Split it out somehow, let's list it. Let's list the pros and cons for the monolithic and the headless front ends, and, make some ranging to say that monolithic would be fine for those type of customers and headless would be good for another type of customer. So when to use what? So few sentences, your thoughts. So let's start with our front-end expert, Sergey. Tell me, please, what are the pros and cons of monolithic and the headless in comparison? For me, as I'm a merchant and doesn't have much of a technical experience, but I want to make a choice.
It's a good question, but at the same time, it's a really big question that I can't answer in a few words. We have to always count on your team and their expertise. So if you have a team of only experienced in Magento, especially in built-in Luma theme customization, you have to follow this way, because using something else requires time and additional investment in budget, in time, in deadlines, etc. If you prefer Hyvä themes, you can go with your team who already experienced it only in Luma, for example, and spend some time to investigate how to work with Hyvä, because maybe you spent additional 1 week, 2 weeks to understand how to work with that, but in long-term perspective, it will be faster in development, in implementing new features, etc. If you hired a team that completely experienced it in only headless stack, for example, they work it only with React or they work it only with Vue, but they don't have any experience and imagination how to work with Magento, especially, you have to go with headless, even if it will be more complicated in your setup, CI/CD, integration, etc. You have to go with that, because to teach people how to work with Magento, you can spend much more time that it's expected initially, because it's not always about development. It's always about integrations. You have to explain to a customer how to work with page builder, for example, but how to render it on a ViewStorefront or any other front, but with headless stack. I had Linux, and on all the three instances with operation system, you have to understand how to set up it, and it's always different, and it's always slow, and it always have a lot of issues just to install project. And I remember when I joined Magento development initially as a junior developer, I spent 1 week to set up one project, and it was really long. And then when I had already experienced how to manage it on different OS, I remember when I changed company, got a new, like not a new project, but already existing project, but new for me. I had to install it as well. The documentation was nice, but specific Docker setups, etc., giving me a feeling like I'm a junior developer again, and I spent 1 week to install project when I was a senior. And it's really annoying, and you have to count on this as well. So it's not only like entire development in general. Yeah, you have to think about all the integration, all the preparation to start this project, and always about expertise of your team, of course. But from the merchant point of view, if you have a new client, you have to ask them what they expect. I don't know, maybe they already have a store and they have some analytics, and they know that, for example, most of the users using only mobile devices, for example. That's not the way where you have to use Luma, because Luma is pretty slow for mobiles. If a customer already have some external services for CMS management, for example, I don't know, Contentful, Storyblock, Sanity.io, etc., you have to go probably with Headless, because it's easily to manage all the CMS stuff based on the Headless technology, because you can't integrate external CMS with already existing page builder. It's pretty painful for implementation, to allow a customer to edit everything, etc. And the last step, I agree with you when you mentioned that even if you use Headless, you have to probably use native checkout, because it's always a huge thing that you have to predict how to work with that, because checkout requires a lot of payment integrations, custom things like pick up and store with some models, etc. And from this point of view, probably you can use hybrid, but not for general development, but mostly for specific pages even. And for example, account pages and checkout could be still on Monolith architecture, but the rest of the pages, like category page, product page, all the legal page, etc., could be managed on Headless, because it's faster, it's easy to implement, it has just a lightweight size in the bundle in the result, because it's not only like Adobe Commerce issue with external, built-in checkout, but has to be redirected and connected from a headless storefront. The same stuff is implemented with Shopify, for example, because when you use Liquid themes, you don't have access to completely edit all the account pages, you don't have access to edit and customize a checkout page, because it's always maintained from the Shopify end. And you can customize everything with Headless and Liquid, but you have to go with prepared for you already predefined stuff. And for customer, maybe which doesn't have a huge budget, doesn't have a huge team to support everything and implement all the customizable stuff, probably it'd be better to go with Shopify, because you have a lot of things out of the box and it's pretty nice. Also, their visual editor is always nice, because you don't have to go with third-party CMS service. You don't need to go through all the pain with Magento page builder, because it's limited from some points of view. But at the same time, you have to understand all the business goals and ask them first, because if you know that customer wants to have some specific customization for visual editor, page builder, liquid customization, etc. And at the same time, they want to have a lot of store views with different languages, with different markets, products per market, etc. Shopify could be not a good solution in this case, and it doesn't matter what you use, Headless or Monolith, it's just limited. And you always have to remember all the limitation of all the existing e-commerce platforms.
Okay, and now let's simplify all of that. I'll try to summarize what you have mentioned. So if you want to have a mobile first, then the Luma is not the case to use. So
Yes.
forget about that. You would rather need to think about Hyvä or Headless solutions for that. If you have very big traffic, if you are multi-billion enterprise, then most likely it's better for you to use Headless because you have much more flexibility there and you can afford the team to work on a technology that you choose. You can just hire this team. If you cannot afford that and you have team already in-house, or you know the experts that you want to work with and they have experience only in certain area, in certain technologies, focus on those technologies, and most likely on those technologies there will be a good front end, right?
Yeah.
What else? Did I miss something?
Maybe we have to
checkout.
say... Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'll tell about the checkout. So you mentioned checkout is usually better to keep from the original Magento, because it's a nightmare of the integration, right? In
Yes.
most of the cases. Yeah, and please add what you try to say.
I wanted to say that all the points that you are talking about is mostly related to B2C customers and point of view. But if we are talking about B2B, Vitaly was right that you have to go with more specific customization and requirements and business goals. And at this point, it doesn't matter what device is used for managers, for customers, etc. It's mostly important what you already have out of the box with specific e-commerce platform. And in this case, Adobe Commerce is the most used platform because it has a lot of models in marketplaces from different vendors. Also, they have a lot of out of the box in vendor. So it will speed up you initially to go with MVP maybe at the first phase, and it allows to easily to migrate from another stuff, from another platform, for example. But if you develop something from the scratch, probably in this case, a monolith Adobe Commerce is not always a good way to start even B2B, but you have to always remember some limitation of other platforms. For example, Shopify doesn't provide a lot of good stuff for B2B as well. So you have to balance always with this, and with your expertise you have to remember what you can implement, very pretty limited, and it doesn't matter how much time you will spend on that if it's impossible to implement. It's always a good point to keep in mind and share it with the client as well.
Okay, yeah, so we definitely need to be open with the merchant that want to implement one another front end in order to find the best solution that fits him. Okay, great. Thanks for your opinion. So the same question addressed to you, Alexander, Vitaly. Let me repeat that. What would you advise to the merchant to choose between Monolith or the Headless, and which one in particular case? So imagine that merchant is not a technical person. He doesn't know what to do. And make it simple. Alexander,
Well,
I
can
see you're
try.
ready.
Okay, yeah, well, this is a good question. I would say that the merchant, they still should have some kind of technical understanding what they are doing, or at least have a responsible technical person for this. First of all, I think that there should be answered the question, what are requirements for scalability of the storefront? What is expected traffic and how they're going to handle scalability? Because there is a trick. If you have a monolith, and I don't know, you, for example, just imagine you using AWS and you already have 12 instances of Magento running just because you have a huge traffic, and then you say that for an next sale you need to multiply it. The bill for a hosting for AWS will be just a huge. And when you have a headless front end, you can separate the front end application itself. It will require much less resources than the whole Magento monolith, and it can help you save the money. So it will be kind of a return of investment. But for this, it's expected to be the huge scale business. I mean, if you are having one server and you are happy with it, then, well, we just go with the monolith. You don't need probably the separated front end, the headless front end. As Sergey already mentioned, that the team is very important. If you're a team good with some technological stack, that probably be easier and cheaper to stick to it rather than to invest into their education. And if you are building the composable commerce, you also need to understand the limitations of tools that you are going to integrate into your ecosystem. Because if your tools need to do something with your storefront and you are using the Monolith application, then you also need to add all these integrations into this Monolith front end. And in the result, it can easily become a nightmare to maintain in future. So this basically 3 things. I think that if scalability, integration with other services, and the technical stack of your developer team, if they are not important for you, not a deal breaker, then just go with the Monolith. I mean, you will save a lot. It will be a fast return of investment. You don't need to invest much to have a front end ready. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay, great. Thanks. Vitaly, what is your opinion on that topic?
Well, it's hard to add something after Alexander because he actually repeated what I wanted, what I had on my mind. I would only question the hybrid approach, probably because it doesn't seem to be like justifiable in any case. Because like if we are replacing with PWA, for example, pages, those pages that are usually cacheable, and still having like regular checkout, which is not cacheable and which is usually like bottleneck for performance. So what's the point to have PW? Like, because we like we still ending up having the worst performant part. So it doesn't make any sense. I saw those mistakes in the past, and I wouldn't recommend to have hybrid approach in any case, because like again, it doesn't make any sense. Regarding Hyvä or Luma, I believe like we need to put aside marketers from Adobe, from Hyvä, from marketing nowadays are pretty aggressive and often deceiving. I not agree that Hyvä solves performance issues, because in general and on ideological level, it's still backend side rendering, which is the same as Luma, just in different implementation. And in good hands, Luma is still has good performance. If you have great team, it's still optimizable. So I don't think it's like it has huge difference. It only has its place because Adobe one day said that they gonna deprecate Luma. So like Hyvä team just fulfilling this gap for those who want to have up-to-date storefront, which is not deprecated, but still has advantages like a layout system, which is easily adjustable, and support of all existing Magento ecosystem. So yeah, they just fulfill this gap. I wouldn't say that performance is like, I don't know, to skyrocket compared to Luma. It's just not the case.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you for your opinion, guys. From my side, I want to add that I do not fully agree on your statement about the Hyvä. So it has been created in order to resolve the front-end performance, but not the back-end rendering side. But yeah, that's definitely true if you keep using this monolith architecture which Hyvä is, the same as Luma. Then you are facing with the limitations on the server load and on a backend of yours, and so on and so on. But Hyvä has a lot of great features that are getting implemented by the Hyvä team and that are not going to be implemented in Luma unless you go and manually do that with your hands. So yeah, as for me, I think that monolithic approach with the Luma and Hyvä gives the medium and small businesses the best value because they can get as many plug-and-play solutions and extensions that are available in our marketplace, in market in general, than in compared to the headless, which would be the more preferable solution for the big enterprises. But I truly support every point that you mentioned, guys, that first of all, the business goals needs to be decided and pros and cons needs to be made based on various platforms. But this is simplified guide from me. If you are small to medium and you want to get as much return on investments, then I would go with a monolithic approach and would rather use Hyvä than Luma because you get more for the same money, I would say. But if you are super big and you want to be bigger, then Headless. That's your choice. Which one of them? Up to you to decide. Okay, guys. So if there is nothing to add, we can wrap up. Right?
Probably I can add one note. I not completely agree with Vitaly because a hybrid approach has sense to implement, especially until you didn't work with requirements to implement some tricky stuff for CMS, for specific pages with interesting design, especially if it's not aligned with grid and you want to have to provide to customers feelings of the something modern, something nowadays, something cool, with some videos banners, with some abstractionism on the side. You don't have a possibility to implement something like that with, for example, Magento page builder, or it's not provided out of the box with visual editor in Shopify with Liquid. You have to implement something new and probably use third-party services like Contentful and Storyblock in this way. So you have to implement hybrid because it's two different areas, because checkout and cart page and etc. account pages, maybe it's more functional way how to deliver some things and build some relationship with your customers. But visual stuff, just to provide these feelings of good experience of surfing your site, your products, and to be inspired of that, you have to focus mostly on CMS stuff as well. But there are two completely different areas, and in this way you have to use maybe built-in checkout on Monolith, and for other way, for CMS, you have to implement Headless because it's much easier to implement all the required stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. I also support that. I would say if you're ready to pay more for the development teams, then you can do whatever you like. You can fly to the moon.
Exactly.
It depends on the budget and your requirements.
Can say like if you're ready to pay more to have a fancy front end, but not ready to pay more to have PWA checkout, then hybrid approach is for you.
Yeah, you could be in the middle.
Exactly.
Okay, great. So it was a cool conversation. Thank you very much. I gathered some knowledge as well from that. And thank you, Sergey, that you've joined. I really appreciate your expertise and that you have shared your knowledge with us and with our watchers, subscribers. So that was great. Thank that joined us.
Thank you, guys. It was a nice
Thank you very much,
conversation.
Thank you. And
Thank
ciao.
you, guys. Thank you, Sergey.
Bye.